Hello adventurers, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are in Branson, Missouri, and we're checking out Ripley's Mobile Marvels. Now this is a unique display, to say the least. This entire display is here to show us what some of the military vehicles that have been used throughout time actually look like. But there's some other cool facts here, and I can't wait to share them with you. Let's go. Now this location is directly beside the Ripley's attraction. You can't miss it on 76 Boulevard. And as we enter, we find this. This actually says, "Welcome all curiosity seekers, military aficionados, veterans, and history buffs. This exhibit is a tribute to all those who have served in the fight for freedom by presenting some of the unique mobile equipment that have helped these brave men and women in all their important missions." Now we all know that Ripley's has some unique things throughout each one of its individual museums, and along the way you can find some unique military items inside the halls of the various museums across the country. But this is by far the largest collection of military vehicles I have found yet, and I have been to a lot of Ripley's, let me tell you. This one is super cool, and as you can see, super centrally located, easy to find. But I really appreciate the fact that here in Branson, where they do so much for the veterans and always support the troops, that this is here and easy to find and access. And one of the things that I forgot to mention at the beginning of this video, this is absolutely free. You don't have to pay for a cost of admission to come to the outdoor mobile park area, and so this is a great free attraction here in Branson. Now each display does have a sign that looks like this, and this is pretty interesting because it not only shows you what the vehicle looks like, what it is called, but also gives you the manufacturing date and some fun facts. For example, did you know the Medal of Honor is the highest award for valor in action? This first recipient was Private Jacob Parrott in 1862. Now did you know that the Willys Jeep was actually created in 1940 and started to roll out for the military before they actually entered World War II? Well, believe it or not, you can find that out here. You never know what you're gonna find at a small stop on the side of the road, but this one is chock full of brain wrinkles, and we have a lot of exploring to do, so let's go. Here we find the M16 Otter, and this one is really unique looking, guys. The Otter was actually designed by Pontiac, and it was designed in the early 50s as the T46. It began its life with the intention of replacing the Studebaker M29 Weasel, and it is an amphibious cargo carrier that was designed to carry cargo and up to 8 troops over shallow rivers and swampy terrains. Another fun fact about this one is that it is almost entirely made of aluminum, and it makes it extremely light, but also this became a problem because it made it more vulnerable to fire. Now as we get to the duckling trailer here, I wanted to share a fun fact first. This one blew my mind. Did you know that women have been in service since the inception of the military? That is a little known fact that a lot of us just glaze over. We think that women didn't enter the military until much later, but in fact, all the way back in the Revolutionary War, there was a woman who was employed by the military as a spy. She went by Agent 355, and she was a spy during that war. What? That is wild. Yep. Now as we look at the duckling, this is actually an amphibious trailer. It was affectionately known as the duckling because of its small size. It was actually made for an LTV, and it has a 4.5 ton capacity, and it has 245 cubic feet of cargo box, which means that it's bigger than some of the vans that we see out there driving around with people living in them. There were only about 212 of these trailers that were actually manufactured. You know how earlier we were discussing the Weasel? Well, guess what, guys? This is the actual Weasel. This is the M29 tracked vehicle, and it was called the Weasel. It came from the work of a British inventor. These guys right here were used in both Iwo Jima and Okinawa. That is insane. And seeing it, it's not actually that big. Now again, this is a Studebaker product, and that was out of South Bend, Indiana. The M29 was produced and used and largely regarded as a success. Now, of course, as we're walking around, all of these vehicles have been decommissioned, which means that a lot of the things have been stripped out of them. But you will notice that you can still see the form, the size, and also the context behind why they were used. And it's pretty fascinating. Now, in this section, there are 3 different vehicles. There is a Dodge ambulance, the Scorpion tank, and something called the Water Buffalo. Starting off with the M43 Dodge ambulance, this was actually a version of the M37 cargo truck. It was built almost on the exact same chassis. The ambulance saw action worldwide, right beside its M37 counterpart. As we take a look at the M56 Scorpion, this is an American unarmored, air-mobile, self-propelled tank destroyer. So I thought it was a tank, but it's actually a tank destroyer, and it's armed with a 90mm M54 gun, and it had a simple blast shield, and it had a completely unprotected crew compartment. Last but not least in this trio, we have the LVT-4. This was also known as the Water Buffalo, and it was an amphibious war vehicle. And the amphibious landing craft actually was introduced by the United States Navy and the Marine Corps. Now, the LVT-4 over here, the Water Buffalo, was the most widely used vehicle of its kind throughout all of the wars, which is kind of interesting because I've seen a lot of different variations of this, but I did not know that there was one specific that they gravitated more to. And it's because this one right here was the one that had all the improved functions and features. So this was top of the line at the time, and because of that, they really liked how many different things they could do with it. So it was really important during the war. Okay, we have another set of 3 right here, and these are all vastly different from any of them we have seen. We will start off with the GMC M220 shop van. So that's the 220 shop van. And this was actually a part of the M135 series of 2.5-ton cargo trucks. And they were the successor to World War II, their deuce and a half. It was the backbone of mobility throughout all theaters of war. And believe it or not, the M135 was one of the most versatile that was actually made. Next up, we have the M59 Armored Personnel Carrier. And this was deployed in the spring of 1954 to replace the M75. It had 3 key advantages. It was amphibious, it had a lower profile, and it was cheaper to produce. Only about 6,300 of these were actually built. And last but not least, the M3 half-track. This was one of the world's first armored personnel carriers, and it was half-wheeled and half-tracked. The half-track saw service around the world. Its sides were lightly armored so that it could have some protection against shell fragments, and it had a back door to provide easy entry and exit. I think you can see from walking around, they have a good variety of different kinds of vehicles that were used, and the history that they share with each and every one of these is just really epic. It really factors into some of the other places that I visited previously and kind of gives you some ideas about different engagements and theaters and things like that where these vehicles were used. And then you can start to envision the people who would have been within them, and that's the fun part. But we're not finished yet. We have some of the big boys left, and this one's huge. What is this? Oh wow, this is called the Dragon Wagon. That's cool. This is actually the M25 we were just speaking about. This is a tank transporter called the Dragon Wagon. It was a heavy tank transporter and a tank recovery tractor. It became one of the more used versions of this, and it came in an armored and unarmored version. You can see the one here that we're looking at is actually unarmored, and it was originally designed to be used as a part of World War II. Now, a little fun fact though, we called it the Dragon Wagon. Why? Well, it's not because of its sheer size. It's not because it has a trailer that kind of might look like a tail. No, it's because absolutely sometimes they would witness flames. That's right, flames shooting from its exhaust. So they called it the Dragon Wagon. Those flames consequently are part of what also led them to replace it later on. Next up, we have something called the M2 211 deuce and a half. It was a 2.5 ton truck, very similar to the one that we looked at a while ago, but it was a 6x6, and it had a standard class medium duty truck design, but it was used during World War II. They were actually in service for over half a century and made it all the way up into the 90s before being finally retired. And while this one did have a nickname, there weren't any cool stories about it blowing fire out of it, so yeah, they just referred to it as the Deuce most of the time. Now this one is potentially one of the more interesting looking ones. In fact, this resembles some of the duck rides that you see even moving today. This is called the Lark V, L-A-R-C-V. That's right. That actually stood for something though. Lark stood for lighter, amphibious, resupply, cargo, 5 ton. This one actually is an aluminum hulled amphibious cargo vehicle, and it's capable of transporting up to 5 tons. Now let me just tell you, our military is not the only one that uses this particular style of vehicle. In fact, they have been used in numerous other countries, including Argentina, Australia, Portugal, the Philippines, and even Iceland. Now you may have heard of a 4x4, but have you heard of a 6x6? Well, the M561 Gamma Goat is just that. In fact, this is a diesel-powered 6-wheel drive, and it has an articulating chassis, and it's known as the Gamma Goat. The Goat was designed to negotiate through the rough terrain in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. They also used an M37 4-wheel cargo truck whenever this proved to be inadequate. Did you know the DoD in some way, shape, or form has been around since the 1700s? In fact, this Department of Defense, the one in charge of all of these things and providing the funding for our troops, has actually been around since basically the beginning of our country. But as we kind of proceed through here, we can see some of that shift as it unfolds throughout the stories of each of these vehicles. Like this, the M5 high-speed tracked artillery transport. This is actually a fully tracked vehicle, and it was designed to tow both the howitzer and the long tom field artillery. Now this actually has a winch and a roller system, which allowed them to pull vehicles from the front or the rear. Now, a fun fact about this guy though, in some of these, the driver would actually be in the center, and in some, they would be on the left-hand side. And it doesn't specify as to why, but I'm sure there was a method to the madness with that. Now, next up, we have the last vehicle that we'll be looking at, the Chevrolet Class 110 air-filled crash truck. And this was actually manufactured by Chevy, and it was a division of General Motors. And this was actually manufactured by Chevy, of course. It had firefighting equipment and things added to the body after manufacturing. And the Class 100 and the Class 110 crash trucks were the first standard crash fire units developed for air-filled use. Something I have learned through all of our travels and seeing all sorts of amazing things like this is that you did see a very firm pivot at one point when the war began. And industries that typically would not be manufacturing wartime products moved into doing so because there was a need for them. Entire plants would shift from like recreational items for families to wartime effort things. And I think it's really interesting to see how that ties into this exhibit as well. One last thing to wrap this up in true Ripley's fashion. We've seen all of the amazing vehicles, but this right here says it all. This is a 2,000-pound Eagle made entirely of used auto parts, and this is signature to Ripley's. They have statues like this located throughout the country that are just really ingenious and amazing, and you can see the attention to detail in these, and it's fabulous. So I think this is a good place to end it. Remember guys, we're not here for a long time, but we are here for a good time, and places like this give us new brain wrinkles and give us a little bit of context for the things going on around us. Until next time guys, bye!